Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hilton Hotel for this, our penultimate Cardiff Business Club event for the year. A particular warm welcome to David Howden, our guest speaker for this evening, and colleagues of his from Howden Group. As I mentioned, this is our penultimate event during what has been quite an interesting and challenging year, where we saw the return of face-to-face meetings, for that to only then be interrupted again around Christmas time, where we had to enter into a period of restriction. So somewhat disjointed, but I think you'll have gathered from the atmosphere, not only this evening, but the previous events that we've had, that people do really want to be engaging with each other, interacting in a social environment rather than on the end of a computer screen. So long may this continue, and please get the message out as we move ahead into next season that we're keen to grow our membership. As a club, we have endeavored to provide an opportunity for our members and corporate partners to develop their links and their contact network, whilst providing obviously exposure to business leaders and people from a sectoral spread, providing a degree of diversity. And over the course of the last sort of 12 months, we've had the chief exec from Kier Group talking about the challenges of the construction sector. We've had Cole Needham, who was quite inspirational. He's the founder of IMDb, the world's largest film and movie database. We also heard from Admiral Jude Terry, who is the most senior ranking female officer in the Royal Navy, and she was quite insightful as to her career progression and obviously the challenges of the armed forces. And we also had Sir Peter Wanless, Chief Executive of the NSPCC, so providing a bit of a broad mix of sectoral insights. We're aiming to continue providing the diversity of speaker, and we're obviously delighted that David is here this evening to give us an insight, not only to the world of insurance, but having spoken to David for about half an hour, there's a lot more to David than perhaps meets the eye. So we look forward to that. And interestingly, David was insistent that he's allowed to roam the room. So there we are. Be warned, be warned. Anyway, in order for the club to achieve what we've been able to achieve over the course of the last 2.5, 3 years, we've been very grateful for the support of our season sponsors, Odgers and Cardiff Metropolitan University, and also our corporate members and UR members, without whom it would have been particularly difficult. So thank you very much to all of our supporters. So to tonight's event, we're extremely grateful, firstly, to Howden Group, who are sponsoring this evening's event, and delighted to welcome a number of their guests. One or two I know of old. We're all looking a little bit older, I have to say, but one or two from a number of years ago. But you're all very welcome indeed. Howden Group is a significant player in the world of insurance. And I read a little bit on the web about the insurance industry overview that you recently gave, and you said times are a-changing. And I think that's fair to say, and I'm sure we'll hear more from David about that. Much of that change is based on higher inflation, low investment yields, climate change, elevated catastrophe loss activity, and fluid cyber threats. They're all making the risk landscape a much more challenging area to predict. More on this later, I'm sure, from David. Anyway, Howden Group was founded in 1994 by David as a specialist directors and officers broker. And from its modest beginnings reaching into Europe, Howden Group is now one of the largest insurance intermediary groups in the world, and the largest outside of the US, with approaching 1.5 billion in revenues, managing premiums of more than 12 billion. It has been challenging the status quo for its clients for nearly 3 decades. The group comprises insurance broker Howden and underwriting business Jewel, and has operations in 45 countries across Europe, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, the US, and Latin America. Its people are at the heart of its difference. And listening to David, I'm sure he'll mention that, how very true that is. And of its more than 11,000 employees, over 1/3 are shareholders in the business. The group is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK, with 6,000 employees operating from more than 150 locations across the UK and Ireland, including through Howden, A-Plan, Ensley, and Aston Lark brands. So moving on to our guest speaker. As mentioned earlier, David started his business, interestingly, with 2 of his friends, according to information. After getting fed up with working for companies that kept getting sold, he decided to build one that couldn't be, and built the business on a trust, friendship, expertise, empowerment, and independence basis. Outside of insurance, David has a range of interests. He breeds rare long-haul cattle, middle white pigs, Hampshire down sheep, and racehorses. And listening to him, he clearly has a passion for horses. He is founder of Cornbury House Herd and has a passion for sustainable and regenerative farming. His love of horses has led him to re-establish Cornbury House horse trials during lockdown and to racecourses across the country in the hope of accessing the winner's circle. Ladies and gentlemen, David is also patron of the Princess Trust. He's been a strong supporter of the Princess Trust, not only personally, but corporately. And I know he has a long-standing friendship with Sir Derek Jones here, Chair of Trust in Wales. And we're delighted that Derek is here this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome David as our guest. David.
Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. You've just said everything I was going to say about the group, so I have to think of something different to say. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I've already been accused by someone who actually works for me of having no Welsh roots whatsoever. So I'm going to start with my roots and explain why I have a passion for Wales, and indeed, as been mentioned, know Sir Derek for my support, both corporately in the Princess Trust, but also personally, particularly with the Welsh region here, and I'll talk a bit about that. I always think that when I'm giving a talk with business people that, you know, I don't want to stand up here, so I don't want to stand here and lecture you. I'm not like, I want this to be interactive. So I'm going to try and, you know, talk a bit, give you a bit of things to think about, but then let's have a conversation rather than me just talking to you. And if at any stage, actually, you want to interrupt me, there's no bread rolls, I don't think, anywhere. If you want to interrupt me, chuck something at me, I'm quite relaxed about that. I'm a very open person. I want to really talk about resilience. And don't worry, it's not all going to be about insurances. It's about building resilience. And I'm going to talk about 3 sorts of resilience. I'm going to talk about resilience in people. How do we build resilience in people? Then how you build a resilient business itself, and then how we perhaps build a resilient world. And I do think that we are living in times that are changing, and how we actually survive that and thrive in that, I think, is quite important. So let me start with my roots. My grandfather was born in the Rhondda, and his father was an engineer, a mining engineer, and actually died when my grandfather was just 4 years old in a mining accident. He died and left 7 children. And my grandmother couldn't afford to keep them all, so she gave my grandfather away to a friend of hers. He was born Watkins, she was Spencer, and William, my grandfather, was called William Spencer Watkins. And he was very lucky, actually, because of very unfortunate roots when they actually, Mrs. Spencer was a very generous woman and sent him to Llandovery College, where he did really well and he excelled. And I think many of you know it's a great school for many reasons, not least the number of rugby players it produces, Paul, you know, like, and so he was also a rugby player. And he, from that devastation of losing his father, he then did well because someone supported him. And to me, that is part of that story of how you actually react when something goes wrong. And one of the reasons I like the Princess Trust is because it's actually about how you help people and give them a foot up, sometimes when they've actually down on their knees, not for their own reasons or good. And I think as a society, if we can actually do that, and we can bring on people, then we build a better world. And I think that, ultimately, as we look at how we treat people, then if you treat them well and you give them opportunity, you end up reaping the reward from that. So I go on to then myself and talk about a bit. I actually was a rugby player, bad one, but I broke my back playing rugby when I was 16. And my father had died as well, tragically, when I was 7. So I had a mother and no father. And my mother said, well, if you're not going to go to school, you can bloody well go and get a job. So I went as a 16-year-old to try and find a job. And the first interview I had was with the Blues and Royals, which is a regiment in London, a man called Colonel Fane. And Colonel Fane said to me, well, tell me, young man, what's your private income? I said, I don't have a private income. That's why I need a job. So we won't do here at all. So I left there and I fell into insurance like many people. And I went to work at a firm called Howden that hadn't been a family firm for generations. And I went to work there in 1980. I was 16 years old. And my first job was basically getting bacon sandwiches and coffees for the more senior people. And in the 80s then, there was a big roll-up of many of the sort of British brokers got bought by American brokers. And in that time, I thought the culture of those businesses wasn't something that I really thought I appreciated. They didn't seem to be about their people. They seemed to be about the shareholders. And I didn't sure that's where I wanted to work. So in November 1994, I left with 2 friends. It was exactly that. 2 friends. We started a business. There was actually a dog as well. I had to bring the dog to the office. My first wife, Ava, had left me. She thought I had worked too hard, and so she left me, and she left me with the dog. So I had no choice but to bring this dog to the office. We had a very small office, and actually the dog was a receptionist. So when you went to the office, the dog would come pounding up to you, and she was called Flight. I often reflect that whatever that is, that's 28 years ago. Flight died a long time ago. The first wife is still alive, but there you go. You can't have everything in life, can you? So there I was running what was the smallest business in the world at the time. We had no staff, no clients, no nothing, etc. But we had some philosophies that we thought about. We wanted to build a business that was owned by the people working in the business, and where you could feel you could build your career over a long time, and build something that ultimately, had a different culture and a different DNA. And sure enough, if you roll it on, to today, it's an extraordinary business. We do have 11,500 people in the business. 3,500 of those have shareholdings in the business. I'm trying to build what I call the biggest small company in the world, with a small company culture, not with a big corporate culture. And yet we've managed to take that culture to 45 countries around the world, from India and Africa, the Middle East, the United States, etc. And people really care in our business and have a different DNA about it. And I think, thinking about how you build a business of scale, where actually the employees are the fundamental owners of that business. And you think about how we go from where we were with nothing, no clients, no nothing, to now 1.5 billion of revenue, controlling 12 billion of premiums. That journey over 28 years has really about being able to attract talent, attract and retain talent, and how people come and join us for being somewhere different. And to give you some idea, the business is now the largest non-US insurance broker in the world by a long shot, and growing very fast. In COVID, in the last 2 years during COVID, we have nearly doubled the size of the business. And in fact, our organic growth, excluding M&A, in the last 6 months is 25%. How do you achieve that rate of growth? Is because you're doing 2 things. You're attracting talent, and you're empowering that talent. We talk about having an owner's mindset in our business. It isn't about, do you actually necessarily have a share? It's, do you think you can make a difference? Do you actually think that your vote counts, your voice counts, or are you just a number? And I think if you empower people and they feel that they can make a difference, then they just work a bit better. And I often say to my clients, you are not my most important people. The most important people in my business are the colleagues who work with me. Because I know if we look after them and we focus on them, then they will look after you. And I never talk about the numbers. I never, ever talk about the numbers. We smash the numbers time after time. We've got outside investors now, but I never talk to my numbers. You look after the people, they will look after the clients, and the money will look after itself. As soon as you start focusing on the money, you kill all of that dynamism in the business. And people say to me, well, that's easy to do, David, as a small business. Well, 28 years on, we're a big business, and we're still beating our competition by having a very different DNA. And what we've done recently is we've gone a level further, and we actually made our foundation a shareholder in the business. So as the business grows in value, actually the foundation grows, and people working in the business donate their shares into the foundation. When we give sweet equity shares, very often they say, well, I'd like to give some of that to the foundation. And we've done some really cool things. So recently in COVID, the Red Cross had real issues how it was getting funding relief. There's about a 20 billion funding gap at the moment between disaster relief agencies. And normally what they do is have to come and rattle the tins after the event. And we said, well, hang on a second, we can use insurance for a force for good here now. We can price that and we can put that in the market. And I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll use our foundation to pay the premium for that. So rather than the foundation giving the Red Cross £1 million, and then when it needs it, we give it £1 million now. And when it needs it, it gets 100 million of insurance. And I've gone to other big foundations all around the world and talked with them about that. And we're now closing that 20 billion gap in funding relief. So thinking about how you do things differently and how you are basically you have a bigger purpose than profit in the business, I can assure you helps you actually build in the long term a bigger, more profitable business. And I think if we thought about that, I call it a sort of new capital model. And I think if you think about the capital models, there's a lot of things that sort of quite broke in our world. And I think that thinking about something where you have a long-term capital model around the employees at scale is actually a very interesting prospect. So that's my first point, building resilience in a business. How do you do that? And how do you do that at scale? Second thing is about actually how you help build resilience around the world. And I'm a big believer. Paul talked about my sustainable farming, regenerative farming, but we are massively involved in the whole journey of sustainability. I sit on the Sustainable Markets Initiatives. We're driving how you have the energy transition, because without the transition, we're never going to keep to 1.5. In fact, we're already blown going to 1.5 anyway. But ultimately, hopefully most in the room are not any of those people who think we're not suffering. I can tell you, as someone who deals in insurance, we are absolutely already having the effects of global warming. Last year was the first year when insured insurance losses were over 100 billion when the wind didn't really blow. The losses came from stuff that we hadn't really thought about. German floods, Australian fires, Californian fires, freezes in Texas. This is all weird stuff going on, and it's going to get worse. So we need to work out how we become relevant in helping that transition. So I've got my big part of my business is working around how we support companies in that transition, how we take risk off their balance sheet, because ultimately we need investment to come in to help this transition happen. And that investment is not going to come in if the risk is too much. So it's about how you actually help individuals, investors, companies build resilience. We're working with what's called Resilient Cities, which is all a charity run for many of the major cities all around the world, putting our insurance professionals into them, working out how they build resilience in those cities. And insurance is only a small part of that. It's not everything. A lot of it's about risk management, it's about investment, it's about what we're doing, but it is a part of it. And I think that building resilience, we're in a world today where you've got a lot of change going on, and many of you will run companies and know the challenges, and we can all talk about whether it's about the inflation that's going on, or the wage inflation that's coming around the road, whether it's the debt markets are now shot to pieces, whether it's what's going to happen on supply. If I talk to most of my large clients, supply chain lines are gone. If people can't finish things, I was talking to a big manufacturer of aviation engines, and he said to me, I won't say the name, but he said, David, we can build 95% of an aviation engine at the moment, but no one wants 95% of an aviation engine. They want 100% of that aviation engine. So ultimately, the challenges on businesses are there, and we've got to now deal with how we deal with that. And I think that, in your business, you need to think about, how do I build resilience for the next black swan that comes along? Because now there were a huge amount of black swans. Who expected COVID? None of us expected COVID. And then who thought Putin was going to invade in Ukraine? No one really thought. Well, some people did, actually. And a lot of people didn't think it was going to happen. So I think you need to think about, in your business, how do you build that resilience into your business for things that you don't know that's going to happen down the line. And, I look back, we were celebrating our 25th anniversary in October 2019, so just before COVID struck. We had a big celebration. We had all the staff out. We had a fun day with the kids. And then the next day, there was going to be a big sort of event. And I remember I was with, my wife's called Fiona. I was with Fiona, and we were lying in bed, just doing nothing naughty, just reading a book. And I said to Fiona, Fiona, did you ever think in your wildest dreams that we would build a business of this scale and size? And she put her book down and looked at me and said, David, you've never appeared in my wildest dreams. So I think you need people to bring you up sometimes and give you a leg up. And then you need some people to bring you a bit of reality. And certainly for me, in building a business, I always have this belief that I want to keep my feet firmly on the ground. And I think passionate, I love insurance. I think, insurance is a force for good. It can be. And I know many of you may grow and think, oh my God, insurance. But I do think it has a value. I'm not sure necessarily that, there are other areas of financial services that really can help individuals, help companies, help actually countries. And I believe that. But ultimately, what I'm doing isn't really around insurance. It's about building a business and taking it on a journey with a group of colleagues who want to build something together. And that's enormously satisfying. And I get people to look back and talk about how proud they are over the last 10, 20 years of what they've achieved, and then what they achieve outside of that business. And so I'm a big believer that if you're going to be successful in business, you've got to do other stuff as well. If you're just doing insurance all day long, you lose some ability to actually be relevant. So I'm encouraging all my staff to go out there and have different interests, options, whatever they want to be, and live their lives, live their lives and enjoy that. Because if we just work, all work and no play make the Jack a dull boy is absolutely the case. So I think encouraging that. So, I do have a passion for horses. I sadly don't get to the winners enclosure quite as much as I'd like to. And I love breeding horses and doing that. I'm a big supporter of British eventing, where I think it's a great sport. It's the only sport in the world where women and men compete on equal terms. And we're right at the top of that as well. And, as a business, we're huge supporters of sport right across the board, because I think it's a way, of getting people engaged and out there. And I think that you can do that. Back to our support for the Prince's Trust, you're going to develop a better society as well. So, I hope for those who work in the business, I often think, do we always deliver what we say? And the answer is we don't. We know we're not perfect. We make lots of mistakes around the place. But generally, we are trying, as I say, to build a business that's not about profit. It actually is about doing good. But the fun enough is it makes a lot more profit than those businesses that just focus on the profit. So I'm going to, at that point, sort of really, I'd like to throw it open to some questions and get some audience participation going on, because I said I wasn't going to talk. So who would like to start off with either some questions or observations or anything? Because I'd like to get some engagement. Yeah.
It's a roaming mic.
Roaming mic, hang on.
Questions. You say that there are, out of 11,000 employees, there are 3,500 who are shareholders. Yeah. What's the reason for the difference? Why did people not come in? And secondly, you say there are now outside investors. How has that affected the culture of the company?
Yeah, so I think some people just don't feel that they want to invest, and that's why I talk about that owner's mindset. They feel they have, are sort of, they just don't want to be investors. And we're in lots of different countries. You get different cultures with different ways of doing it. But we open it up every year. We have an internal market. People can buy and sell shares. You can only own shares if you work in the business. And this year we had 960 people who never owned a share in the past, write out a check and buy a share for the first time. So I would never expect it to be 100%, but I'd like it to be higher. It used to be 25%, it's now 35%, and I'm hoping in time we'll get better. The outside investor is all about getting similar businesses. If you get a disalignment with your investors, so it's written into our shareholders' deed that we don't pay any dividends at all. All the money we make as a company is reinvested back into the company. We don't pay any dividends out, and they have to agree to that up front. And they have to lock in for long periods. They lock in for 7-8 year periods. General Atlantic have been with us now for 13 years, and I have the Canadian Pensions Fund, CDPQ. They've been with me 6 years, and they all sign up for long. So they get why they're on the journey with us, and that's very important. If you get the wrong investor, then they're not going to be aligned with you. You get the right investor, then absolutely they get what. But and to come back to it, they may not, but it's something. Our share price when General Atlantic invested in us in 2012 was £3.21. It's now 12 times that. So they do very well as well.
Hi, Robert Lloyd Griffiths. How do you encapsulate and cascade down your obvious enthusiasm? By the way, I loved your presentation because you put it in such a way that you can bring people with you. How do you ensure that your 11,500 employees have the same massive enthusiasm for their roles that you clearly demonstrate this evening?
Well, I think first and foremost is what we're talking about. It's about engagement. You've got to engage with people. If they don't feel engaged in the business, then they're not gonna be passionate about it. So I think that engagement and the empowerment, we talk about a huge amount. And when we ever sort of do acquisitions or we bring people on, we talk a lot about what makes us different and how we engage on that. And so I think they just come on that journey. We're talking about when we did the 2019, when we celebrated the 25th anniversary, what was the main way we celebrated it? It wasn't actually the part of the party, was at the end to celebrate us raising 1.5 million over a year. We'd engaged all the staff to do different things. I shaved all my, you can probably say I quite like my hair, I shaved all my hair off. I couldn't swim really, so I learned to swim. And I did the Alcatraz swim. I swam from Alcatraz across the bay, and people did all sorts of crazy things. So it's just about making them feel that this is theirs and part of it. And then it's also about, culture isn't something you slap on the wall and say, this is our culture. Culture is what people feel when they walk into the room. It's how you treat each other when you say, meet someone. It's how you are. You know that from your families as well, what the culture of a family is like. So I'm a big believer that culture is absolutely the most valuable thing we have. And therefore we work on it all the time. I'd say we're not perfect. I get that, So we're doing massive pushes at the moment around ESG and around, and again, things like D&I. Why do I care about D&I? Again, it's very selfish. I know perfectly well that if I sit in a room with a diverse, eclectic group of people, I get much better feedback than if I sit with the same boring people that are just like me. I know that, and you get that. So it's very, very. We don't have a single one actually, for good reason. Otherwise, all our overseas offices are always run by the people from the country. We have no expats turning up in raincoats telling people how to run their business in Philippines. That's bullshit in my view. It's just that doesn't happen. So so we have, and I believe that if people really believe it. And and it falls from the top, obviously, but then they engage with it and they go with it. But if they think it's just a load of slogans and you say, well, people first business, and in fact, they turn up and everyone's managing upwards and no one's managing downwards and sideways, then they go, well, we know that. It's just really a corporate slogan and we'll go along with that. And I do think, you think of the energy. I've just been in Australia and we've got a startup going on. We employed 70 people, do a startup in Australia. And I was there 10 days ago and they're really engaged and they're having a fun time. And I met the guy there who's the CEO and I said, how's it going? He said, I'm just loving it. I'm just absolutely loving it. He said, "Do you know what? In my old job, I swear, David, 80% of my job, my time was managing my own head office. That's what was done." He said, "I spend no time doing that here in this role. I spend a whole time working either with my colleagues or with my clients." And you think about the amount of energy that's sucked out of a room by people doing politics or whatever else. We have an expression that, politicians, not the type we vote for, but political people in business will be shot at dawn and hanged, drawn, and quartered as well. So got to believe it and live it.
David, can I
Yeah,
ask a question?
yeah.
I wanted to ask about ESG.
Yeah.
It seems to be everybody's favorite subject in the corporate world at the moment. How are you feeding that down into your supply chain? It's just 3 letters to SMEs at the moment. I don't think they entirely understand what it means. Are you helping support them in developing strategies?
So what we're really looking at with ESG is 3 basic policies we run to try and keep it simple, because you're right, it's a great term. So first and foremost, the simplest thing we're doing is getting our own house in order. That's relatively easy to do. So we do that, we promote that, and we've actually, do a lot of work on that. Second side is what we're doing with the foundation of the charity. So that's how we actually, in essence, interact and help other companies, businesses actually go on the journey. The third bit is the bit really that's most relevant from our point, is how we use our group to help people on that transition. And that's really the interesting side. It can be anything really. I'll give you a good example. We had a coal-fired power station that wanted to transition to wind. The problem they couldn't get the investment because of the danger that the technology wouldn't work, and they would then have no ability to supply the energy, and that would be a massive loss. Very simple problem. We said, okay, we can insure that. We can actually buy forward pricing in the spot market, insure that, and that will allow the investors to come in. So it's literally about sitting with boards and people and listening to the problem, saying, actually, can we? So it was same with the Red Cross. The Red Cross thing came about with just me sitting and dinner with the guy and him telling me his issues. So we're trying to work with all our customers to say, what is stopping you transition, and can we be relevant for that? And I think you're right. There's a lot of, so I stood up recently, I was talking in Glasgow, and someone said, well, David, how can you talk about, wanting to build a sustainable world when we know your insurance broker, acts for oil companies around the world? And it absolutely does. But we only act for those where we believe absolutely they have got a proper transition plan. There's many clients that we will not act for. And I said to them, do you know what would happen if you shut all the coal-fired power stations off in India? How much renewable energy is in India today? Basically none. You just kill people. Is that what you're going to do? So I think we've got to be part of the solution and not just throw out, and there's huge pressure, and sometimes pressure is good, but some of the pressure is leading to knee-jerk reactions, which aren't. I mean, if you're going to do serious energy transition, you need BP and Shell doing that. They're the people with the money to do that transition. So actually, activist investors saying pull your money out isn't necessarily, and some people in insurance as well are equally not good at that. They get sort of, in a way. So I believe that it's about how we help companies to transition rather than say no to it. Need a mic, I think, so we're here.
David, thank you for your time.
Okay.
As a young man, a person trying to carve my way in Europe, what sort of tips for resilience could you impart from your experience so far?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, because it was a short period of time, but I could tell you endless things about how I think you build resilience in individuals. But I think first and foremost, the most important thing you could have is belief. And I think if you give someone belief, it's such a powerful tool. When stuff was going terribly wrong, but I won't go into it at home, my mother was always praising me, giving me belief, making me feel like I could do stuff, when most of the time I was useless, actually. But, she gave me self. And I think if you believe in yourself, however hard that hit it, you sort of pick yourself. If people are telling you all the time, you're useless, you're no good, whatever. So I think it's about that self-belief element. I think the second thing Liz, is I think, we are people, and I think engagement, and whether you call it engagement, empowerment, use yourself to engage with other people, and because actually most people want to help. There are some oxygen suckers out there who will be negative, and but they're, forget them. Go and find people who are interested in helping and help you build. And that can be, I had along the way loads of people who, gave me, I'll never forget one time I was in the middle of doing a deal, and unfortunately I had at the time not a very good accountant, finance director. And I thought I had quite a lot of money in the bank. And in fact, we didn't. I got a call, a guy called John Home. I remember he worked for Bank of Scotland. He called me up, John Home. He said, David, just about that overdraft that you've got, when are you going to repay it? And I was buying a company. So I didn't know. I said, John, that's all under control, John. I'll come right back to you on that one. Fine. Put the phone down. I called Alan Smith and I said, Alan, what's going on? Oh, I didn't want to worry you. I said, worry me with it. We're supposed to be writing a check to buy a company in Sweden. Okay. And I called someone up I knew from the past to ask their advice. You know what they actually did? They actually gave me a loan and helped me through it, etc. So I think, use your network and whatever, use your own energy in things. And I think that you'll build that way resilience in a business. Any other questions?
David, your mother was obviously very inspirational to
Yeah.
your upbringing and the challenges that the family have faced. Have there been any other people that you can single out and pinpoint as being people who've really given you that extra bit of motivation and momentum to take you to where you clearly are now?
Yeah, well, there's two sides. My mother is still alive. She's 95, my mother. She's born about the same year as the Queen, and she's allegedly blind, although she said to me the other day, why is your hair so long? You're scruffy, you're like bloody Boris Johnson, So she's got selective vision, I think. She can see things when she wants to. I think, funnily enough, there's two types. I do think, back to Peter, I think there's something about being given a bit of a jolt so that when things go wrong. And when my father died, I was 7, and he died. It was a bit of a messy thing. And I was the only boy, so I sort of became the boy. And we had to sell up our house in the south and move to the north, get no money. My mother went to teaching. She taught autistic kids. And as we were leaving the house we had, the guy who bought it was a horrible man, actually. And he snatched the keys off my mother. Give me those keys now. This is my house. And I remember running up to him. And I got pushed down the ground. But I remember thinking, you little... And I wanted to get back, So there's something about, actually giving yourself a bit of hunger. I like people with a bit of hunger in them. And then early on in my career, I met a guy called Brian Marshall. I worked for, actually, when I left Howden's. And he had built a big business. He gave me a lot of advice and I think helped me understand about that belief that you can go off and build a business. And I think that entrepreneurialism is very important. So there's been a number along the way.
Question over there?
Yeah.
Very interesting talk. I'd just like to pick your brains a bit on how you coped during the pandemic. Presumably, you ended up with quite a lot of your workforce working from home. If so, did that work? Did you manage to retain their enthusiasm for the business? Are you happy for them to continue to work from home, or do you think it's important that they're all back in the office, so to speak?
Got a lot of questions there. Let's start with I never forget COVID and suddenly everyone working remotely, and we've got to get everyone working remotely in 45 countries. Logistically, it was quite difficult. And the first thing I did when we got everyone on the screens and working was I went on to them. I started just communicating, just talking to people. And the very first thing I said is, I said, look, we don't know how bad this is. We don't know what's happening. I need you to feel good. So what I guarantee you is no one is going to lose their job during this pandemic. And we give an absolute guarantee of that right across the board. And it was some of our competitors did the opposite. They actually cut salaries and cut things. And it was the most dumb thing they'd ever done. It was a manna from heaven from us. So the first thing was to give people security. And then technology. We luckily invested in technology, so we had the technology to do it. And we actually had some of our very best years during COVID. We grew massively during COVID because I think people felt good. They felt empowered. I'd say the only really frustrating thing that happened, the only people who didn't have a job, we have got a great London offices, the people who didn't have a job was all the people who worked in the sort of back office and catering. So I said, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. You'll all carry on paying with salaries and everything else. But if you want to, we're going to go and work with some of the London hospitals and provide catering services, free catering services for doctors and hospitals. And most of them said, yeah, we'd love to do that. We did it for about a week. A week in, what happened? We got a call from some contractor at the NHS to say that they had an exclusive contract with one of the chains, Costa or whatever, who had complained that we're providing free coffee, and we had to leave the hospitals and weren't allowed to do it. I really thought, my God, that shows the colour of some people. So I think, you know, feeling people feeling positive, feeling engaged was really important, and communication. We communicated massively heavily during the whole of COVID, and technology. We had the investment in technology. Look, do I think people should come back to the offices? I think so. You know, how can you build culture? How can you train young people? I had someone the other day say, David, if we're a people first business, why can't I just work from home if I want to? I said, because we're people for everyone, not people for just you. And I think, you know, of course, flexible work is great. We were talking about it early on. That ability to have both is great. Don't get me wrong, and we will always embrace that. But I think it's very difficult to really build a business at scale when everyone's working remotely. I think you need to get people together and do that. We haven't put any edicts down, so anyone can do within reason sort of what they want to. We haven't made any, got to be 4 days, got to be 3 days, got to be 5 days. But we are certainly slowly encouraging them. And, you know, 7 o'clock Monday morning, I'm in the office. And most of the senior team are. And I think you need to do that. Training people is just remote. And just, I don't know about you lot, but I mean, Teams calls drive me mad. You know, it's like your turn next, and your turn next, and your turn next, and then your turn next. You know, whereas on a table, it's like, shut up, you do that bomber. It's just much faster. You know, it's very slow. So yeah, I would like to think people. And then again, you know, we got 160 offices in the UK all over the place. You think about the people that we support. And I give this example as well. You know, in the city of London, if we don't go back to work, what happens to the hairdresser? What happens to the guy who shines the shoes? What happens to the sandwich shops? What, do we don't care about those people? You know, they can't choose to work remotely. So I think I'm hoping that 5 years from now, people will use flexible working, but they'll laugh at the thought that we could all work totally from home. I think it's got to be a combination in my view.
I think we've probably got time for one more question, if anybody. Derek, yeah.
We can't let you off this easily. Your worst business mistake?
Oh God, there are so many, Derek. I mean, my worst business mistake is, without any doubt at all, not judging people correctly. I think if you get people a bit right, whenever it's gone wrong, it's because of whatever reasons I haven't trusted my gut enough, and I've done a deal that is probably strategically good, but my gut was telling me maybe and well, they'll change, they'll be good at it. And I think, you know, I think that it's all about getting the people right. If you get the people right, when whatever goes wrong, which will happen, it always happens, you'll work together and you'll pull together and it'll be fine. If you've got a bad egg in the business, then, you know, it's a bit like, you know, that old thing, you wouldn't want to be in the lines of the guys behind you shooting at you. You want everyone aligned. So the worst mistake is choosing the wrong people. The even worse mistake is not asking them to leave quickly enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've been inspired over the last 35 minutes of David's sincere thanks. I'm just absolutely delighted that you didn't come when you were scheduled to come just at the start of the pandemic, because we would have been on Teams, and that would, I think, have been a great.
I'm not good on Teams.
David Howden, ladies and gentlemen. Director of CBI Wales to give the formal vote of thanks.
This is always the worst job in the world, isn't it? Following the star. So Paul sent me an email on Friday and he said, would you be happy to do the vote of thanks from David from Howden's? So I thought, yeah, I could do with some DIY tips. So, and And then I Googled it and I realized it was insurance. And I thought insurance was boring until tonight. So I must be honest, I've really been enthused. But yeah, it's been a great presentation. And I've been scribbling notes and I'm all over the place. So excuse me if this doesn't follow any particular flow, but I was writing them down as David was saying them. But yeah, I'm also involved in the Prince's Trust with Derek in Wales, and the Prince's Trust does a brilliant job, and David's support is invaluable. And I think as a nation, we're incredibly generous. This is a huge name drop, no apologies, but I was at an event last Wednesday with the Chancellor and the ambassador to Ukraine, or the UK, the Ukraine's ambassador to the UK was there. And he was telling people that 60% of the non-military support that the Ukrainians have received has come from the UK, which was an incredible stat. You know what I mean? And it shows how generous we are. So, you know, if you're not involved with the Prince's Trust already, please get involved because it does some wonderful work. I just noticed as well, 2 friends and a dog, you started your business. So, yeah. So I was thinking after dinner tonight, I'm going to rush over, wake my wife up, and I'm going to say, and wake the dog up and say, well, look, we're starting a business tomorrow. that was really inspiring. But thank you very much. And you mentioned people. It's very important. People are so important to the business. It's such a tight labor market out at the moment. And you talk to people, and every business I talk to is either struggling to recruit people or retain people. So if you treat them right and you get the right people, as David's shown us tonight, you can really get a really successful business. And I was just noticing that, yeah, a couple of things I liked what you said, you know, business has doubled in COVID, which is an incredible achievement. And I love this. It's a great strap line. Insurance is a force for good. Yeah. I don't know if you use that. And one last stat for you, interestingly, you mentioned supply chains. And I was on another call last week, a Teams call, which, as you rightly point out, is pretty uninspiring. It's much more fun seeing people in person. And they told me on this call, one particular company told me that 80% of the world's containers are sitting off Shanghai at the moment, which is really worrying. So if you've got a supply chain, you know where your stuff's sitting and waiting to come back. So anyway, David, thank you very much. It was a brilliant presentation. I've really enjoyed it, hugely amusing and informative. And thanks for coming along to Cardiff tonight. I do hope you come back again soon. Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, here. And thank you, Ian, for giving the vote of thanks. So that concludes the formal part of this evening's event. Looking ahead to our last formal speaker event of the season, that takes place on the 13th of June at the Hilton Hotel at 6 o'clock. When we have Professor Sir Chris Evans, a highly successful and influential scientific entrepreneur. Sir Chris, like David, was due to speak at the event a couple of years ago, and then unfortunately the pandemic hit. And I know that Sir Chris, like David, was very keen to make sure that he was here in person and not on the other side of a computer screen. So we look forward to that. That event will be kindly sponsored by VMware and Amazon Web Services. So we're very grateful for that. So to conclude, thank you very much, David, for an inspiring talk and presentation. Thank you to Howden Group for sponsoring this evening's event, and delighted that a number of your staff are here as well. And as always, thank you to Cardiff Metropolitan University and Odgers for their continued support. So ladies and gentlemen, for those who aren't staying for the meal, thank you. We look forward to seeing you in June. And for the rest of us, let's enjoy the meal. Thank you very much. Thank you, David.